On episode 242 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we have best-selling author Dr. Sara Gottfried, and we discuss her book, Younger. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/242. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Recently, I found that my training was getting stagnant and I wasn't seeing much progress. Maybe you can relate. Despite the hard work, it looks like you're standing still, like running in deep sand. So I hired a personal trainer to coach me and be a strength coach. Now, he pushes me through my workouts, keeping me focused on the progressions. He also provides accountability. He's in the gym every morning with me 3 times per week, so I know he's going to be there, again, just that little push that gets me out of the door each morning. And he gives me programming, and that programming kind of keeps my workouts fresh because he's bringing up things that I hadn't really tried before, hadn't tried in that order or with those number of repetitions. So it kind of keeps it challenging for me in a way that I might not be able to do for myself. And obviously, he shares his ideas on health and fitness, and our paradigms might be a little bit different. So it's an opportunity for me to kind of challenge my own paradigm to see, if we're going to try something that he wants, and he's the coach. So again, I don't question what he's telling me to do, short of injuring myself, but I do have that conversation with him, and I'm learning a lot about my body and what it can take. The volume of what we're doing is a little bit higher than what I was used to. So it's good for me to be challenging my body, challenging my mind, and having a good coach will do that. Now, are you feeling right now like maybe you're a little stuck and maybe you could use a coach? Well, I'd love to be your coach and do for you what my coach is doing for me. So if you're wanting to get unstuck, if you want great results, and you want to be looking your best this summer, then go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/coach. And there you'll find an application. And that application is a good way for us to know if I'm a fit for you and whether maybe you're a fit for having an online coach and whether online coaching will work for you. I know my business and I could do the training for myself, but I have found just kind of having that person there to bounce ideas off of, get some programming from, kind of challenge my paradigms has been extremely valuable for me. So I'd encourage you to go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/coach and sign up today. If the title of the book we're profiling today isn't enough to get your attention, Younger, I don't know what will. But beyond that, the guest that we're having on that wrote this book, she is the real deal. She went to her medical school at Harvard. She's been to MIT. She really knows her stuff. She's written 2 bestsellers on hormones, and this book, Younger, pulls a lot of information together and puts it in a way that's very easy to understand, very personal, because she shares a lot of her own personal experiences with these things. And I'm telling you, this has been my favorite book so far this year, and I would encourage everybody to go out and get this book. It's already a bestseller as well. And so I really do think you should go out and get this one if you're not going to read anything else. And it's available on Audible, so you can get it as an audio book, but it's well worth the purchase. There's so much great information in it. And this is one of my favorite episodes as well. So with no further ado, here's Dr. Sara. So Dr. Sara, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks, Alan. Happy to be here.
Your book, Younger, a breakthrough program to reset your genes, reverse aging, and turn back the clock 10 years, is actually an awesome book. Probably one of my favorites that I've done this year. It really kind of brings together a lot of concepts that, I still struggle with some, but, it's as you kind of get into the science of it, and you encourage people to kind of skip the science in the book, but I'll be the first to say, don't do that, because how our genes work, and more importantly, the expression of those genes is really a big part of who we are, what our tendencies are, and kind of just what makes us what we're dealing with. So I would encourage anyone reading this book, don't skip the science just to get to the meat of the protocol, because there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Well, thank you. Obviously I love the science. And so hopefully we'll get into some of those details today. But I wrote it that way because I have some girlfriends who are readers, and they said to me, listen, I want to know how to turn back the clock. I don't want to hear about every single gene and, how to do it specifically. I want the protocol. So that's why I wrote it both ways.
And I like that, though. I mean, it really does kind of say, okay, this is not just stuff that you're pulling together saying this is what other people are saying, or literally this is what the science is kind of putting together now based on what we do know about gene and gene expression. These are the things to consider as you want to go through these protocols and what these protocols are going to do for you. So I really appreciate, maybe I'm a geek too, but I really do enjoy the sciences of it.
Sounds like you might be a geek along with me.
Yeah.
I love it. Keeps you young.
It does. Well, that's one of the things I was thinking as I was going through the book is, you have it in there is just make sure you're trying to learn new things all the time. And I'm like, well, this book is doing that for me. So I'm glad I got this going on. Now, at the beginning of the book, you kind of get into some of the areas where as we get older, because I think all of us have experienced it. We're all over 40 now. And so we're all kind of feeling this thing of, hey, it's happening, that getting old thing is actually starting to happen for me, and I don't like it. I don't know anyone who's aged and just said, yeah, I kind of like getting older and losing bone mass and losing muscle mass, and my skin's not the same, and all the different things that we go through. But you kind of go through in the book kind of the 5 aging factors where things can go wrong. Would you kind of get into that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So these are certainly things I've noticed in my own body. We can start with the muscle factor. I think a lot of people can relate to the way that aging shows up first in your muscles. So metabolism slows down after 40, and you can actually put some numbers to it. You lose about 5 pounds of muscle per decade after age 40, and it gets replaced with fat unless you are actively doing something about it. So that's the muscle factor. Another piece in the muscle factor is your mitochondria, the little powerhouses inside your cells, and they can become fatigued and leaky and just not work quite the same way as you get older. And so you want to get those perked up and really supporting you. The next factor is the brain factor. The idea here is that your nerve cells lose speed and flexibility. The synapses, the connections between your nerve cells, start to decline. And so the way that you notice that is you walk into a room and you can't remember why. You have more forgetting, you have less remembering. So that's the brain factor. Now, the hormone factor is maybe what I'm known for more than genetics and epigenetics because of my first 2 books. But the hormones, in general, they start to decline after the age of 40. You have less testosterone, which drives the muscle loss for both men and women. And there's also this thing called thyropause, which is where your thyroid just doesn't work quite the way it used to. And that affects women about 10 times as much as men. Estrogen declines, and that's more of a factor for women because the brain's just not as well lubricated with less estrogen. Your vagina might become dry. You might have dry eyes, etc. The next factor is the gut. I think most people realize that 70% of your immune system is beneath your gut lining. And that's where your immune system can get overstimulated. And it can lead to increased inflammation, kind of an overactivation, and therefore autoimmune conditions. This is an epidemic that we're seeing, especially in older women. They're affected more than men. But it creates this hybrid term that I like, which is called inflammaging. It's the unfortunate combination of aging plus inflammation. So that's the gut factor. And then the last factor is the toxic fat factor. So the idea here is that, when you're trying to stay young, the toxins from the environment accumulate in your fat, and they can accelerate the aging process. They even have a term for this, which is gerontogens. So these are endocrine disruptors, pollution, cigarette smoke, heavy metals, all the things that can conspire against you. So those are the 5 factors that I think about in terms of the aging process. And then maybe more importantly, when we start to get into solutions, like what you can do about them.
And I think all of us, if at some level or another, being over 40, we're each experiencing some of these early on, and it's only going to really somewhat accelerate unless we're living a little bit better. And so you had a quiz in the book that I really enjoyed, and it was called the Healthspan. So this is not one of those, how old are you now relative to how old your body is, kind of like that. It's more of a, if you think you're doing all the right things for yourself, this is kind of a quick little quiz to go through. And you even had a link to a website where they could take this, I assume. And it's called the Healthspan quiz. But it basically kind of gives us the areas where we can focus on improving our health and just kind of seeing how we might be doing today. So you can kind of get into the health quiz, how you developed that, and what are some of the areas that you would covered in that quiz.
Yeah, there's no consensus about the best way to measure aging. There's some experts who think that telomeres are the best way to measure it. Telomeres are the little caps on your chromosomes that are a marker of how fast or slow you're aging. And we can get into my own telomere test and what that showed if you'd like. But when it comes to the aging process, it's not that I want to prevent death. It's not that I want to lengthen old age. Like my picture for myself is not that I want to be in my 90s in a wheelchair, barely recognizing my children and my great-grandchildren and grandchildren. It's more that I want to take the best of middle age, which is where all of us are, 40 to 65, and I want to lengthen that. So that's what I consider to be Healthspan. It's that period of time where you feel fantastic, you feel like you're in your prime, and that's what we want to lengthen. You're relatively disease-free. So health span as opposed to disease span. So when I looked at some of the different ways of assessing health span, beyond telomeres, there's a number of different blood tests that you can do. I just talked about inflammaging. You can do some tests to look at, if blood markers of how much inflammation you have in your body, things like interleukin 6 is something that some of the aging studies look at, as well as C-reactive protein, homocysteine. So those are some of the blood tests that people do. But I just couldn't find a single consensus about how you measure aging. So I decided to create my own. And so that's what this is. It's looking at all the levers of the aging process and how you're doing. So it's graded on a scale from 0 to 100, 100%. The idea with 100% is that you're doing 100% of the things you could be doing to lengthen your health span. And if you're lower than that, like if you're below 60, then there's a lot of work we can do. If you're 70 to 80, then I definitely recommend that you go through the 7-week protocol in the book because there are many levers that we could start to pull in your favor. So the categories are things like how you're sleeping, how much you're moving and what you're doing, your fasting blood sugar, how are you doing with glucose disposal in your body, because that's such an important part of the aging process. What's going on with your relationships, with purpose and meaning, because all of those things are factors that can rob you of youth.
Now, one of the factors you had in there that was interesting, I have to ask about it because it's been something that I guess has troubled me a little bit, is regardless of how fit I get, and I've been to a point where I was, running marathons and ultramarathons, and my resting heart rate has never dipped below 75, ever. And I know that's a big factor in the way you do this rating. So can you talk a little bit about health, about that? And then I want to go back and talk about your telomeres.
Sure. Yeah, your resting heart rate's interesting. I think, I wrote in the book about one researcher in particular who believes that mammals have a fixed number of heartbeats over the course of their lives. And so we want to make the heart as efficient as possible. And one of the ways that you can measure the efficiency of the heart is to look at your resting heart rate. So I haven't run marathons like you have, but similarly, my resting heart rate, sometimes I can dip down into the lower 60s, but for the most part, I'm nowhere near what my athlete husband has. He tends to go down to sort of the upper 40s, mid to upper 40s with his resting heart rate. So there's a number of different factors. There's the athletic effect, which you certainly had. You were pulling the athletic lever, but then there's other factors as well. There's probably genetics involved. There's, some of the pathways in your heart, could stress be playing a role? Certainly marathon training is relatively stressful. So while you're making your heart more efficient, there's also wear and tear going on. So I can't speak to specifically why your resting heart rate didn't get below 75 with all the training that you were doing, but there's other factors besides just the aging process and efficiency.
Which is part of why I like the approach here with this health span quiz is you're not just locked into one thing, because my HRV is actually very, very good when I'm taking care of myself. And my C-reactive protein is really good when I'm doing the right things for myself. So, some of these other measures that we can look at, and then, some of the things in the health span quiz, when I was going through there, I'm like, okay, I'm getting enough sleep. I'm on track for maximizing my point on the exercise and not overdoing it. All the other these little things. I said, I feel they're obviously, if anyone could sit there and say they're perfect after taking this quiz, I want to meet you. But there are people that can over time, and that's what I like about your protocol that we'll get into. It's not intended to be change everything about your life today. It's like, let's start incorporating some things now, and then we're going to recycle and recycle. And over time, you're going to build these practices and habits. But let's get into your telomeres.
Sure. And I would also say that if you look at the data on heart rate variability, you said that yours is quite good. I think that's more robust when it comes to the aging process than your resting heart rate. So that's kudos to you. That's really good news. And the tricky part with making a quiz like we have at the healthspanscore.com is that most people haven't measured their heart rate variability. So it's a little bit tricky to include something like that in a quiz. But getting back to my telomeres, unfortunately, I failed the telomere test. So I did this test when I was 44 years old. I'm now 50. And I got interested in telomeres because the Nobel Prize in 2009 was given to Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF. She's in my neighborhood. I used to teach at UCSF. And so I got interested in the idea of using telomeres as a biomarker of the aging process. And she had done her work in women. She looked at mothers that were in their mostly 30s and 40s, and she found that mothers who had the highest amount of stress were aging about a decade faster than mothers with a normal amount of stress. I don't even know who those women are, but apparently there are some that have a normal amount of stress. And so I wanted to start testing my own patients and looking at their telomeres. But before I did that, of course, I had to test myself. So I went to my local lab, I got my blood drawn, and at age 44, I had the telomeres of a 64-year-old woman. And that is not the news you want to get when you're in your 40s. That was bad news. But, the good news is that it really kicked me into action. It got me to say, okay, I got, my hormones were actually in a pretty good place at that point. I had wrangled cortisol. I got my estrogen into good balance with progesterone. My thyroid was really, kind of award-winning. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to kind of get me into a state where the aging process was slow. So that got me to dive into about 2,500 studies and start looking at these levers of the aging process and to really say, okay, what's doable here? Like, what are the factors that we can really modify that have the biggest impact on the way that you're aging? And then I tested myself again. It took me about 5 years to write this book. And I tested myself again a few months ago when I was 49, and I had the telomeres of a 52-year-old woman. So I closed the gap by 17 years, which felt like big progress.
That is big progress. Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, the way you kind of set the program up, it's called the Younger Protocol, which I like. I think anyone can say, hey, I like that idea. It's kind of a 7-week, let's step through some basic changes. So it's not extremely drastic in any one stage. It's sort of, let's look at this area, focus on this for about a week, kind of see if we can go ahead and build some habits around this, or at least get ourselves rolling so that we see some momentum, start feeling a little bit better. But could you kind of go through the protocol, how the 7 weeks go, and how someone would apply this in their life?
Yeah. So, the way that I developed this protocol, which is based on functional medicine, that's the kind of work that I do. It's based on root cause analysis, which is what we do with the Healthspan score. And then really looking at these levers and figuring out, okay, where are the biggest gaps and how can we really have the greatest impact? So I wanted to start first with what you put in your mouth, because I feel like that is the most important lever out of all the ones that we're going to talk about today. I mean, I love a good sauna, and I think flossing is really important, but I think I definitely have a food first philosophy. So I wanted to start with kind of the hardest thing, which is to change what you put in your mouth. And the idea here is that you want to change to foods that are really filling the typical micronutrient gaps, that are slowing down the aging process, providing the antioxidant support for that rust that all of us have in our body as we get older. That basically means fruits and vegetables. And also reducing the amount of inflammation. So that means low grain or no grain, making sure that you get plenty of healthy fat, and generally about 1 to 2 pounds of vegetables a day. So that's where we start. We start with the feed week of the 7-week protocol. And then flossing is also incredibly important. So flossing twice a day is what I advise in this first week of the protocol, along with using an electric toothbrush 2 to 3 times a day. And it's amazing how much that affects your health span. It's been shown that those two factors, the flossing and brushing and also going to your dentist, reduces mortality by 30 to 50%. That's pretty huge. So that's the first week of the protocol. And then I thought, well, after diving into the food, I think it might be important to have a week that's a little bit easier. So the second week is to focus on sleep. And I didn't want to write another boring chapter on sleep. I really wanted to focus on, okay, what's the exciting new novel ideas here? And what I found was really some interesting material. When I went through my medical training, starting back in '89, we were taught that you should never nap it screws up your sleep architecture. You should get your sleep at night. And they even told us during our medical training that if you got at least 3.5 hours of sleep, that was enough to be able to function the next day. That was the days of 36-hour shifts as a medical resident. But the latest data is really that you need 7 to 8.5 hours of sleep. It doesn't have to be all at night. Sleep during the day, like a 30-minute nap, can have the same impact as twice as much sleep at night. And you want to sleep on your side. So one of the things that's kind of cool is this thing called the glymphatic system, not to be confused with the lymphatic system. The glymphatic system is like a shampoo that happens to your brain at night. You have to sleep on your side to get the best impact from it. It removes toxins and debris, which is what we all need. And then another factor that a lot of people don't appreciate is your vitamin D levels. So vitamin D directly and indirectly affects your sleep. And you want to have a serum level of vitamin D between 60 and 90. So those are some of the factors in the second week.
One thing you did mention in the book that I did want to highlight, and we can get into this a little bit because it goes back to the HRV conversation a little bit, is that beyond just sleeping on your side, it's preferable to sleep on your right side for the vagus nerve?
Yeah, the vagus nerve is such an important nerve. And just as you were connecting it to heart rate variability, heart rate variability is a measure of the balance between your sympathetic nervous system, kind of the on button for your nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which you can think of as the off button, kind of rest and digest. And so the vagus nerve is involved with both halves of the nervous system, but it's mostly affecting your parasympathetics. So sleeping on your right side, I always kind of think about this when I'm in yoga class and they have you roll onto your right side after Shavasana. Your right side just seems to activate the vagus nerve more than your left side. So I'm glad you made that point. Yes, you want to turn on the vagus.
Okay. Because my wife actually, it depends on which house we're in, where we are. I always sleep closest to the door. That's where I've always preferred to sleep. And at home here, she's actually on my left side, and I tend to sleep on my left side more. When we're in Florida, then I tend to sleep on my right side more. So I just need to tell her, I'm sorry I'm putting my back to you, but Dr. Sara says so.
Yeah, I'll back you up.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, let's keep working through the protocol.
Yeah, so the next week is move, and I feel like you might have a lot to say about this particular week. I think most people know that exercise is as close to a panacea as we have in medicine when it comes to slowing down the aging process. And I would even go one step further and say exercise is a way to trick your brain into thinking that you're not aging the way that your hormones say you are. So I'm a big fan of exercise, and I already presume before people start this protocol that they have a minimum exercise plan in place. And I should refer them to your awesome podcast to kind of make sure that they're on track with that. But there's a couple of factors that I think are important. One is that 1 to 2 hours of moderate exercise is what's been shown to be the most impactful when it comes to slowing down the aging process and lengthening your health span. So 1 to 2 hours of moderate exercise. And I say that to men and women, and a lot of people just kind of roll their eyes, especially here in the Bay Area where people work at startups and they just hardly ever leave their desk. And so, I want to find ways to really fit this into your life. One thing I did was to get a treadmill desk. And so now I walk about 5 to 10 miles a day while I'm writing. I'm not walking right now, but while I'm writing, I certainly do. And while answering emails. And so I've figured out how to fit it in.
My trainer today was telling me, he said, that they're looking at their department there at school because he's majoring in kinesiology. And he said, that they've noticed that the instructors in kinesiology are not model citizens for fitness. They want them to start moving more. And I said, get them adjustable desks with a treadmill. And he looked at me like I was a space alien. And I had to explain to him that you can get used to typing. You can get used to doing your work while you're walking 1 to 2 miles per hour. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I got one on Amazon that wasn't expensive. It was like $500. And you can certainly build your own and not spend a lot of money. And it's, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't sound ergonomic. I don't think I could do that. I mean, how does your brain adjust? This is one of those adjustments that your brain makes that actually slows down the aging process. Like having a novel challenge, like how to walk and kind of do your normal work while you're walking, that's really good for the brain. So movement, big fan of movement. Also big fan of the next week, which is release. I feel like I was a gymnast in high school. I was a runner through my 20s and then became a yoga teacher in my 30s. But I always had kind of this emphasis on running, just like getting my miles done when I didn't have a lot of time free. And I would focus on sort of the muscle component or the aerobic component or, high intensity interval training. And I wouldn't focus as much on release, like how to really get the kind of recovery that your body needs. So the fourth week is about release and how to do that. And I talk about a lot of different forms of release, whether it's craniosacral therapy or practicing yoga, just really making sure that you're releasing those habitually tight muscles that all of us have at some place in our body. Do you have tight muscles, Alan?
At times, yes. And that's part of it. My background, when I first started growing up, obviously I played football and some sports like that, which meant, okay, we're going to lift weights. And then, of course, you start getting more interested in girls than football. So it's now you want to build the muscles. And so I spent much of my 20s packing on muscle. And yeah, there's some movement patterns that I still really struggle with. So working on mobility has been something that I think that'll be a lifelong chore for me now to kind of keep that mobility and continue to build it. But I think the cool thing that I can say is at any age, my hip and knee and ankle mobility right now are better than they've ever been in my entire life. I mean, maybe other than when I was a toddler, but I can do a lot more now since I've been actually focused on it for about 3 or 4 years. I do have a lot more mobility. And I think that's, when you start seeing some of the signs of older age, when you really look at it, people slow down, their gait gets shorter. I still have some tendencies that I catch myself with. And, my trainer's looking at me like, why did you turn your foot out? And I'm like, it's balance. It's nothing more than balance. I turned my foot out because that was going to give me a better base for balance as I did this movement. And I know why I'm doing it. I'm trying to work on it. So I think that's the core of it is, as long as we're aware, and that's part of just knowing, okay, if you can't squat down all the way, you've got a movement issue. If your upper body goes forward when you try to squat down, you've got a movement issue. And so kind of understanding those, and that's part of the reason why, as I was going through and becoming a personal trainer, I went ahead and got into corrective exercise because I recognized that was the one thing I did not want injuries as a function of moving more. So just making sure that I had good movement patterns was very important to me.
Yeah, beautifully stated. I think that a big part of the aging process, especially after 65, is that you're moving, and it probably happens quite a bit before age 65, but a lot of people don't notice it until they have some of what you're describing, like they can't move their hip the way that they used to be able to, or they can't, walk, their stride isn't as long, they shuffle more, they have a shorter step. So I want to prevent that. I think mobility is kind of the operative word here. And also, just kind of looking at the wear and tear hormones, the hormones that accelerate the aging process. We're talking about cortisol, and I think cortisol is the most important here. It's a catabolic hormone. So it tends to, kind of wear down your joints and wear down your collagen over time. And so we want to do what we can to release the tension that we hold in our muscles and other kind of tight places, fascia too. So the next week is expose, and this is about mostly environmental toxins that we get exposed to, what you can specifically do about them, not just the doom and gloom that we're all born pre-polluted and we have all these endocrine disruptors and they're stored in our fat, but specifically what can you do about them? And also some of the good exposures. So things like saunas, I alluded to this earlier. Are you a fan of saunas, Alan?
I am. I haven't had a place where I've had enough space that I could own one. And and the odd thing is, even though I have 3 different gym memberships, none of them have their own saunas. None of them have saunas. So I am a fan of saunas, particularly with the rating I've done on the infrared and some of the dry heat. And particularly when you do the contrast where you're doing the cold pool and back and forth. But it's not a protocol that I've been able to incorporate because I just don't have the convenience of having it available.
Well, maybe we can get one of your gyms to get a sauna because I think they are so powerful. So in terms of a positive exposure, there was a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association where they followed a few thousand guys in Finland over time. They followed them for like 21 years. And they found that the men who have a dry sauna at least 4 times a week had a 40% reduction of mortality. And that is huge. That is such a big reduction in mortality. They had a 50% reduction of cardiovascular mortality. So this is another one of those levers that really makes a huge difference. The data is not quite as robust on infrared saunas, but it was enough for me to get an infrared sauna installed in my house.
And I'm working on that. That's on the bucket list, absolutely, that I will. But
good.
So I'll
everyone
get
who's
there.
listening who wants to give a gift to Alan.
If you want to give me a gift, I do want to. I've already asked for the walking treadmill. No one sent me that yet, but the sauna's on that list too. It's a little bit more expensive. So, if money's an issue, go ahead with the treadmill. But yeah, the thing is, and I want to kind of go back to, and what you kind of explained very well in the book, was what we're doing with the sauna is it's a heat shock protein that basically just has some great longevity and restorative effects. That's the theory, right?
Well, not just the theory. It's been well proven. So it turns on one of the longevity genes, which is FOXO3. And this is one of those genes that just really makes such a difference in your body. There's a few different longevity genes. You probably have heard of mTOR and the sirtuin genes, but FOXO3 is what gets turned on by the sauna. I think of the sauna as being a form of hormesis. It's a form of good stress for the body. And whether you're not in very good shape and you take a sauna, it acts like a form of exercise because it increases your heart rate and it increases circulation. It has a lot of the benefits of exercise. In fact, they even put people with heart failure in saunas because it's a way for them to exercise without stressing their heart too much. And even if you're an athlete, which sounds like you fit squarely in that category, Alan, it improves performance. So that's very well demonstrated, especially with cyclists and a few other types of athletes. So yeah, the heat shock proteins, that's a really important pathway that involves the FOXO3 gene.
And so then there's 2 more weeks in the program.
Yeah, 2 more. So the second to the last, and this is about how to really wrangle stress, dance with it in a different way. This is something I've had to learn how to do. And I talk in that chapter about kind of the different ways that people deal with stress. Some are more effective than others, and how to kind of adjust your stress response. Because one thing I kind of see in my practice, I've been taking care of patients for about 25 years. I see people who come to me and they're in a stress failure state. They don't even know it, but they're in a stress failure state. And they don't realize that, skimping on sleep, having a really stressful job, sitting at a desk like 70% of Americans, not releasing the tension that they have in their body, all of those conspire against them and can really accelerate the aging process. So this particular week is focused on how to soothe yourself and how to reset cortisol, how to reset some of the genes that are activated by stress response. And then the last week is called Think. It's about how to change your brain as you get older. That's, I think, where the next 10 to 20 years of medicine is really going to be focused. A lot of people don't realize this, but when you look at something like Alzheimer's or dementia, which is maybe the number one fear that many of us have as we get older, it is totally preventable. And it starts to happen in your body in your 40s and 50s. So we want to be doing all the things that we can to reduce one's risk of Alzheimer's disease. And it's amazing how many things have been proven to make a difference, whether that's taking fish oil or using bioidentical hormones or reducing mold exposure, the kind of food that you're eating, exercise, meditation. There's many things that have been proven to prevent Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and I really like the case study that you had. I can't remember her name right now, but where she had started going through and implementing some protocols, some of these things, and she didn't do all of them because it didn't fit her lifestyle. She was, working on it, but she saw dramatic improvement, and then she went off of it for a short period of time and kind of regressed. And so it was pretty clear that what she was doing was working. She was able to get back on the protocols and get back to doing things that previously were just not available to her because she was losing her capacity.
Yeah, she's patient zero there's a series of 100 patients. I have a friend named Dale Bredesen, who's a neurologist at the Buck Center in Marin County and also at UCLA. And he now has 100 patients. Patient zero was his very first patient that he put through this protocol. And patient zero, I think, is so cool because she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and she was able to totally reverse it. Not by being perfect with this protocol, but doing about 80% of it. So I love that it's not perfection that we're after here. It's taking those baby steps towards changing your habits that over time add up to major transformation. And you're remembering it perfectly. She had a cold, and when she had the cold, she stopped doing some of her protocols. She stopped a few supplements. She wasn't exercising, and her symptoms of Alzheimer's came back. So that got her kind of recommitted to being on the protocol again.
And that's what I liked about the protocol. I mean, we can't, and this will be an inside joke, you got to get the book, but we can't all move to Marin County. So we have to do what we can with what we can. And so this is not about being perfect and doing everything perfect per the protocol. Your intention is for us to cycle through, 2 or 3 times per year, incorporating some of the advanced techniques each time around so that we kind of build those as a lifestyle the way we just are. So once you kind of give up a certain kind of food and you start eating better quality foods and you start removing toxins from your life and you start working on how to manage stress and you're moving more and you're doing all these different little things in little baby steps, like you said, now you're kind of putting together a lifestyle that fits you based on where you are and what you can do. And then you just kind of add on to it over the years. So, and then again, encouraging them to go back and take that Healthspan quiz each year, just so they can kind of see that progression. So it's kind of gamifies it to say, hey, I'm doing better today than I was yesterday. And I know I am because I'm feeling it and seeing it.
Yeah, for sure. This protocol isn't just my good ideas about how to slow down aging. We actually tested it, which is what I do with all of my books. So we took 1,000 people through this 7-week protocol, and we had them do the Healthspan quiz, the same one that your listeners can do at healthspanscore.com. And then we took them through the protocol for 7 weeks and then tested them again. And on average, they added 10 years to their health span. So I think that's pretty cool. It's well proven to make a difference, even in a short amount of time of 7 weeks.
And I imagine if you interviewed them and had conversations about the folks that did make that improvement, that they felt it and could see it as well.
They felt it. They could see it. Their skin was different. They lost inches off their waist. They lost weight, even though it's not specifically a weight loss protocol, but that's kind of part of slowing down aging, is that you tend to lose fat and gain muscle. So yeah, they definitely could see it. They could feel it. They felt younger.
So Dr. Sara, if someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the book, where would you like for me to send them?
I think the best place to go is theyoungerbook.com. So that's where we have some bonuses for people who buy the book and submit their receipt and, can get you going, especially if you buy the book online.
Okay. Well, this is episode 242. So if you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/242, I'll have a link to both theyoungerbook.com and healthspanscore.com so they can get to all that goodness there. So Dr. Sara, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing, and thank you for writing this book.
Oh, thank you, Alan. So happy to be with you today.
Didn't I tell you Dr. Sara was bringing it? I mean, really, wow. This was an awesome interview, an awesome book. And so this is the one that I'm telling you, please, for your sake and theirs, please do share this episode with all of your friends and family. This is important information for anyone at any age. Yeah, I have it on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, but really, all of the protocols, all the things that Dr. Sara has in this book are well worth your time and effort and well worth sharing. So please do share this with friends and family. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we have Bill Pierce and Scott Murr, and we discuss their book, Runner's World, Train Smart, Run Forever. Until then, have a happy, healthy day.